Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Once again, this is Starboy the Cosmic Witch. And you guys are not going to believe this, but actually right as I was getting ready to record this video, some crazy shit happened. I had already pre-recorded the voiceover for this video, and I was like giving it a listen, making sure it sounded good and everything. And I clicked off. And right after I did that, my bedroom door slammed shut. So that freaked me out. There was like no one else here or anything. And my bedroom door was like slightly ajar. It just slammed shut. So it really freaked me out, considering like the subject matter of this video and the fact that I was just listening to the voiceover and getting ready to record. It just all seemed too synchronistic and creepy. But yeah, I just wanted to include that at the beginning of this too. With that said, let's go ahead and get into the video. Okay, so with this video, I'm doing a sort of a Owlman type of look, pretty much kind of inspired by Labyrinth, David Bowie makeup, and also inspired by the subject matter of this video. As you will see as we get into this topic, Mothman and Owlman. So yeah, that's pretty much the inspiration and the look that I'm going for. But with that said, let's continue on into the video. For this video, I want to talk a little bit about the Mothman. I will be reading this from the Cryptid Wiki, just to give you guys some background on the Mothman and the sort of lore and mythology surrounding it. The state of West Virginia has had its fair share of strange and often inexplicable events, such as the visitation of the Flatwoods Monster and Injured Cold. But perhaps the strangest yet is the arrival of the creature known as the Mothman, who changed the sleepy little town of Point Pleasant forever when it swooped in one cold autumn night in 1966. Today, Mothman is one of the most well-known cryptids in the world, made famous partly by John Keel's book, later adapted to film, The Mothman Prophecies. Mothman is also hunted in Mountain Monsters on Destination America. The first recorded Mothman sighting took place on November 12, 1966, near Clendenin, West Virginia. 5 men were in a cemetery preparing a grave for burial when they saw something they couldn't explain. Lifting off from the nearby trees was a brown-winged creature. The men held to the fact that what lifted off beyond the trees was no bird. It was a humanoid. Now, I found that original sighting very interesting because if you guys have seen my paranormal experiences, paranormal stories, videos I've posted in the past, that sounds very similar to something that I saw in a cemetery as one of my very first paranormal encounters with a cryptid or with a paranormal entity. And you can go back and watch the video if you want like the full story of that, but it's very similar. I basically saw a winged, dark creature with big, amber, orange, red, glowing eyes in a cemetery one night with some friends, and it was hiding behind a tree staring at us. And after we saw it, we took off running, and we heard it like launch through the trees up into the air, and its wings flapping and stuff, following behind us as we like ran away. That's basically like the brief summary of that experience. But like I said, you could go back and watch the video if you want the full story. So I thought that was really interesting. Now I'll continue on with reading from the wiki. The creature was sighted in many places across West Virginia and the surrounding states, but the largest number of sightings happened near the old West Virginia Ordnance Works, an area now known by locals as the T&T area. West Virginia Ordnance Works is an abandoned munitions to the north of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, that dates back to World War II. The facility, during its operation, manufactured ammunition and dynamite. The surrounding area is mostly forest, dotted with numerous grassy clearings and thick concrete domes, called igloos, that were used to store barrels of gunpowder. The area is also riddled with abandoned tunnels, most of which have collapsed, been sealed off, or become flooded with water. A wildlife sanctuary, McClintock Wildlife Management, now encompasses the area. In 1979, fishermen in the TNT area reported that chemicals had been left to seep into the ponds, causing it to be labeled an environmental disaster. By the year 1983, the TNT area was among the country's most polluted sites. It was here in the TNT area on the cold night of November 15th, 1966, 3 days after the first sighting took place, that two young couples would encounter this bizarre creature. Now, I have to take a moment here to also point out November 15th is an interesting night, or an interesting date, I should say, for this to take place, because we know that November 16th is Hecate night. So there's a lot of interesting little synchronicities and connections that I'm seeing to this, but I just wanted to point that out. So this next sighting, which was 3 days later from the initial sighting, is the night or the day before Hecate night. Very interesting connection. Now continuing on with the story. Roger and Linda Scarberry were driving in Roger's black 57 Chevy Bel Air with Steve and Mary Mallet through the area around midnight when Linda noticed, unbelievably, two large glowing red eyes in the darkness beside the old North Power Plant and screamed. They soon learned that these eyes belonged to something that looked frankly human, about 7 feet tall, with wings folded against its back. Roger stalled in the road for a minute, inspecting the strange creature. The four realized immediately that their spectacle was no ordinary bird. The true horror began, however, when the creature spread its wings and pursued them down Highway 62 to the Point Pleasant city limits at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. The four arrived in town, startled and confused, with no sign of the mysterious bird that had chased them. Roger parked his car at the edge of town, and they discussed their encounter, eventually deciding that what they saw was nothing more than an aberrant bird, and in an attempt to face their fears, they again drove towards the TNT area. It wasn't long before they saw the creature again, apparently waiting on them beside Route 62. The couples now realized that their stalker was no bird, but in the instant that the car's headlights landed on the creature, it lifted vertically into the air with tremendous speed and disappeared above the tree line. This time, when they arrived into town, they went to the Mason County Courthouse and told their story to Sheriff George Johnson and Deputy Miller Halstead. 2 hours later, city police began investigating the area, only to return empty-handed. The next day, a press conference was held and the local press began printing on the story, causing others to come forward with previous and future sightings. This was the major event that started it all. In the November 16th issue of the Point Pleasant Register, the strange encounter would be brought to the public eye with the headline, "Couple sees man-sized bird, creature, something." The strange encounter in the TNT area was a harrowing experience for everyone involved, and on the morning of November 16th, 1966, Linda Scarberry was rushed to the hospital by her father after experiencing a nervous breakdown. Do we blame her? On the phenomenon, Roger Scarberry stated, "I'm a hard guy to scare, but last night I was for getting out of there." This creature would be seen throughout the next 13 months in Point Pleasant, and it was estimated that there were over 100 sightings within this time, though these are unidentifiable reports, and the actual number of reported sightings may be quite lower. Mothman witnesses were also harassed by the men in black, who wanted them not to speak about the creature. The strange sightings all seemed to culminate in the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15th, 1967. Many similar cryptids and creatures have been seen worldwide. The sightings are similar to Mothman in many ways, including the fact that most of them seem to be heralds of impending disasters. Some of the places Mothman or its fellows have visited include a mine in Freiburg, Germany, where a Mothman-like creature scared miners away shortly before a collapse. Another notable visit was to the nuclear plant at Chernobyl, where a creature haunted the facilities for a while before the famous nuclear meltdown. There were also 2 Mothman pictures taken in New York on 9/11, and multiple sightings before the Minnesota bridge collapse. Some believe that the Mothman tries to warn people about disasters about to happen, such as the Freiburg and Chernobyl sightings listed above. However, since there only seems to be one Mothman instead of a bunch of its kind, and since he seems rather paranormal, these sightings are not of much interest to cryptozoologists who want to discover new kinds of creatures, physical creatures. Mothman is described as a bipedal winged humanoid. Despite his name, which was given to him by newspapers, he is in no way moth-like and has an appearance more like that of a large humanoid owl. His coloration varies from black, gray to even brown, although it is usually the darker shades. He is often reported to be about 7 feet tall, with a wingspan of about 10 to 15 feet or more, plus the ability to fly over 100 miles per hour. Sometimes he's described as not having a head, with the two huge red eyes set in the chest. These eyes are reported to be glowing, or at least reflective. The details of his face and feet have never been adequately described. One witness who saw the face clearly could only say that the details were horrible and monstrous. She had terrible nightmares and nearly suffered a nervous breakdown. Now I have to point out here too as well, it's interesting that he's described as actually not looking moth-like and actually looking more like an owl. That's actually very interesting because, once again, going back to my paranormal experiences video, my paranormal stories videos, one of my early on experiences, paranormal encounters with a creature, I think I shared the story already, where it was with me and my older sister. We were really young. I think I was around 6 or 7 years old, something like that. My sister would have been 3 years older than me. And it was like a stormy night. The lightning was flashing and we were laying in bed. And we saw from the outside of the window, when the lightning flashed and it illuminated, the curtains and stuff from the outside, there was a shadow cast from outside, and it was like a owl, a horned owl, but its legs were really long, like a human, like it had human legs, but like an owl body, wings, head. We didn't see any arms. We just saw humanoid legs on this owl body. And it was very brief, but we both saw it because it was literally within a lightning flash of light silhouetting this. But we definitely both saw it and we freaked out. It was a crazy experience, but that was one of my initial first sightings. What's interesting to that story, though, what I think I didn't share in that video, was in that same house, in that same area, years prior, when actually I wasn't even born yet, my aunt was pregnant with my cousin, who's the same age as me. I forget the exact details of the story, but basically it was nighttime and she was pregnant with my cousin. She walked out of that house, the same house that me and my sister saw the creature in, but years prior. She walked out of the house. She was like going down the street, I think across the street to where my parents lived at the time. And she saw this owl creature. And she said that it was like standing on like a telephone pole. And she saw it and she got bad vibes because it was like really weird. I think she said it was white colored, like a pale white color. And she got like really creeped out, scary vibes just from seeing it standing on that pole, and it was like staring at her. And she like knew that something bad was going to happen. And next thing she knew, it came down off the pole, swooped down right towards her head. And when that happened, she saw its face clearly, and she said it had a human man's face. And it swooped down at her head and like clawed at her, but it didn't actually get her. She like ducked out of its grasp or whatever, and it flew past her and continued to just fly away into the night. So yeah, that was her experience with the creature. She did not say whether or not if it had humanoid legs, but she definitely said that its face was like a human man's face. So there's that humanoid aspect to it. Okay, and I also talked about the other experience I had where I was like a teenager at this point, once again, still in that same house, still in that same town. And I was like driving my dad's Bronco to go pick up my little brother from his friend's house. And we were coming around the bend on our way back home. We were coming around the bend in this like really wooded, creepy part of the town. We always were like super scared of this particular spot because of other reasons. You know, once again, like I said, go back and actually watch those videos on my paranormal stories, paranormal encounters, because I go way more into detail on all of this, but I'm just summarizing here to get the point across. We were coming around this bend in this wooded area, and I was already scared. I was already freaked out. So was my little brother, because of this area we already knew was like really creepy and like haunted. And standing in the middle of the road was this huge white owl. You know, I'm coming barreling down the road in a fucking Bronco, and it's just standing there in the middle of the road. It doesn't fly away. It doesn't even act like intimidated or scared or anything. It's just standing there, dead center in the middle of the road, staring at us. And it has like red eyes. And we're like freaking out because what the fuck is this owl just doing standing in the middle of the road? And this owl was huge. That thing was like 3 to 4 feet tall. I've never seen an owl that big before. But, you know, it didn't seem like an owl, like the animal. It seemed like some sort of paranormal entity because of the way it was acting, how big it was. It was just really creepy. I literally was honking the horn at it to get it to fly away, and it didn't move. Then I continued, because I like stopped in the road because I didn't want to hit it, of course. And it was just standing there. And then eventually I just revved up the engine and started driving towards it a little bit slowly just to try to get it to fly away. It would not budge for the longest time until I was like feet away from it. And then it finally flew off into the woods. That was such a creepy, but also too, I don't think I shared this detail. When it did fly off into the woods, it landed in a tree, I would say maybe 50 feet into the woods, but it was still like there. It didn't actually like go far, far away. It was like literally still there watching. So that was a really creepy experience too. That might be connected. I don't know if that was the same entity, but it definitely was similar with the white owl form. Although it didn't have a human face, it didn't have, you know, humanoid legs or anything. But it was unnaturally big, I would say. And y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not like an expert on owls species, but the white owls, I don't think should be 3 to 4 feet tall normally. I don't think that's how big they are. But yeah, that was another experience with, I'm kind of considering the same entity, but might not be. And then another one I wanted to share that I haven't shared before was actually my sister, the same sister that I talked about before, who saw the entity with me when we were kids. At some other, I don't remember the exact time period of this either, but at some point when she was a little bit older, she actually, but once again, in that same house, once again, she saw an entity, what I would consider was the Mothman. It's actually very similar to one of the well-known stories of the Mothman. There's a story of a woman in her house looking out the window and she sees it standing beside a tree. There's a popular story of that. That's actually pretty much exactly what happened to my older sister when we were kids. She was in that same house. It was nighttime. I think she said that she was in there alone, like, because the way that we used to have our like living situation set up, this house where all this took place was my grandma's house, and our house was across the street. So I think she said that my mom left to our house and left her alone for like a few minutes in my grandma's house when this happened. And she saw through the window, she was watching through the window as my mom walked across the street to our house. And she saw, after I don't know how long, she was alone. And then she saw this like 7 foot tall entity with huge glowing red eyes standing next to a tree that was outside the window. And she described it as pretty much exactly what you would have the descriptions of the Mothman, a tall humanoid being with big wings. It was all dark, all black, but it had huge glowing red eyes. And that's really all the details she could see of it. There was like no lights or anything. She was literally just looking out the window at night. And she was like super freaked out. And she had to wait for my mom to come back. So that was a really traumatizing experience for her. Now, another little interesting tidbit that might be related to this as well. There was also a local legend in that area, in that town, and in our family. There was this field, I would say maybe like less than a mile away. a mile or two away from the town itself, there was this big field with this like creepy shack just stood in the middle of it. And also a really gnarly tree stood beside it. And year round, that tree was dead. Nothing ever grew there. The field itself also was just empty, barren field. Nothing ever grew there. It was constantly just empty and barren year round. And the tree that was stood beside the shack looked like a gnarly hand reaching up out of the ground. It was such a creepy, bizarre, weird looking tree and just shack and area. Supposedly, 3 witches lived there and they could transform themselves into owls, and fly around and do whatever. And that story and that shack was like really old. Like it existed for a long time. Like the same story, the same shack, even when like my parents were kids. So it was a really like old story. I don't know exactly how old, but pretty old. So yeah, I don't know if that's particularly related to this whole like owl creature, owlman scenario story that's going on with that town and the sightings of this entity. But definitely, it seems semi-related because of the fact that they could shapeshift into owls in that whole mythology and folktale, right? So just wanted to include that as well with this. I will add with this too, though. All this time later, I forget exactly when, sometime when I was like a teenager still, that shack and tree. Well, first of all, it actually started, that tree fell over onto the shack. And over the course of a few years, it ended up like rotting away that shack from that damage. And over time, now that tree, the shack, it's all entirely just gone from that field now. So it's all completely gone now. But it's so weird that it lasted for years and years and years, even from way back in the time when my parents were kids, all the way up to like when I was a teenager. It was like in this pristine condition, even though the tree was dead, even though the shack was like super freaking old. It just kept lasting and lasting, preserved. And then, like, within a few years, it was just gone, wiped out of existence, simply from the tree falling over on it. So this is also really weird, too, to think about. Another story I'll go ahead and share with this, too, as well. Once again, with me, with that same sister. When we were older, we were like teenagers at this point. Actually, I was like 10 or 11. And once again, she would have been 3 years older than me. At this point, we lived in a completely different town. We lived in a completely different house. There was some sort of argument or a fight going on with our stepbrother, and he actually threw something at me, and it like hit right beside where my head was. I think I was like laying my head down on the table, and he threw it, and it like dug into the table right beside my head, but it didn't actually hit me. And it was like this like crazy dramatic like experience. But my sister said when that happened, she was actually looking at my stepbrother when he threw it, and she said that she saw him like transform into this owl creature when he was throwing it. Like the head of like a horned owl is what she saw over his head. Like he shifted into that just for that moment. She was convinced that it was something demonic, like something demonic took over his mind or his body in that moment to like make him throw the thing at me. So that's how she took it. But I think it's once again really interesting that it's like an owl. It was like an owlman, owl shape, and maybe that's connected to the Mothman as well. I mean, it could be a paranormal entity in and of itself. Maybe it's possible that it can possess people, I don't know, or influence them, something like that, too. It's just really interesting that there's these different parallels of this owl man entity. Now, I also don't know how I exactly viewed that story. I could see it from my sister's perspective that something overtook my stepbrother and made him do that. So I could see it as like a demonic possession situation. However, the owl is my spirit animal. It's one of my, animal spirit familiars. So I also could see that as maybe that the owl spirit was protecting me, because whenever he threw that thing at me once again, it was like inches from actually hitting my head, but it didn't. So I could see that as maybe I was protected by the owl entity. Like maybe it overtook him in a positive way and threw off his aim from hitting me. So I could see that particular story, I could see that going two ways. Either that was some sort of demonic entity that possessed him to throw it in the first place, or it was, the owl spirit protecting me, making him, actually miss when he threw it. I've never come to a full conclusion of what that was. But definitely it was something paranormal with that whole situation. So that's basically, that is the little, I guess, personal experience stories I wanted to share from my past that goes along with this video. But another thing I will say, I saw the Mothman again. That's why I'm making this video in the first place. I saw the Mothman again recently. I actually saw him on July 1st. I was going to sleep, laying in my bed. I have like a 4-post bed, and at the top bar of like the headboard part, as I was laying in bed, I saw standing on that, perched on it, I saw the Mothman. And once again, it was like an owl-shaped thing. He's actually described as looking like a large humanoid owl. The only reason that he's called the Mothman is because the newspapers gave him that name. He doesn't actually look like a moth. He looks like an owl. So I saw this entity perched at the top of my 4-post bed thing with his wings like outstretched, sort of just perched, looking over me, looking over the bed, looking over my room. And he was just standing there. And it looked so bizarre because I could physically see it, but it was also, I feel, sort of like a psychic perception at the same time. But I definitely did physically see it too. It was very faint. It was like a very smoky, shadowy form, very faint. But I could still definitely clearly see it with my eyes. And it also was so weird because it was like it was vibrating or pulsating with this smoky, misty form. And though I say it looked like an owl, it did not look like any like normal owl species. It looked like the shape of an owl, but a different species that doesn't exist, if that makes sense. And it was huge, with its wings just open, outstretched. At first I was like, am I really even seeing this? Is this just like a shadow? Like, is this just the way that the shadows are hitting this section of the corner between the wall and the ceiling? Because my bed's up against the wall, so it's obviously the headboard part of the 4-post bed is like high towards the ceiling. And I'm like, is this just a shadow, or am I actually seeing this? But as I focused on it more and more, I started to actually see like the full details of this entity. And it was just standing there. It didn't do anything. It didn't, look at me. I didn't see any red glowing eyes. But yet I did see this like shadowy, smoky, misty, vibrating entity perched there. And at first, once again, I was like, what is this? I didn't know what it was. I was just looking at it. I did have a bad vibe when I saw it. Not necessarily that it was going to harm me, but it just gave off this bad energy aura, like this malevolence almost. I really don't know how to describe it that well. It didn't feel predatory malevolence, but yet it just exuded this nasty energy. That's the best way I can describe it. So it didn't feel like it was here to harm me with any sort of focused predatory intent, but yet just its presence itself was exuding this nastiness, this malevolence energy, if that makes any sense. So once I like started to feel that vibe from it, I was like, okay, well, I really don't care what this is, whatever it is, go the fuck away. So I was projecting energy at it to make it leave, and it slowly started to fade, and then it left. Now, this all happened at 5 a.m. because I had a late night and I was actually barely going to sleep at 5 o'clock in the morning when this happened. But when I did eventually wake up later on the same day, my mom told me that my sister, my oldest sister, not the same one that I've been talking about in this video, but my oldest sister was in the hospital. She was coughing up blood. And I was like, okay, that's crazy because I saw that entity and I was like racking my brain trying to figure out like why was that even here? What was it? What was going on with the whole situation? And then my mom's telling me that my sister's in the hospital coughing up blood the same day. But yet, after the fact of me seeing this at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I was like, okay, I started to realize that that was the Mothman that I saw. You know, like they say, he shows up before some sort of negative event happens. He almost shows up as a herald to it, maybe possibly warning that's coming. Maybe he's the one that causes it to happen, or maybe he's just there because it's going to happen. I don't know. But regardless of the intent, what we know is that he shows up and then soon after some sort of negative event happens. So I started to, piece that together and I took it to mean like he showed up because something bad was going to happen. And one of those things was my sister going to the hospital. She actually did recover. She's fine now. I think she had some kind of pneumonia, but she recovered from it. She's fine now. But that did happen. However, with that, I also think that there was more to it because I think that there's going to be some sort of disaster, some sort of like big scale negative event that happens as well. So that's what I think that the Mothman showed up to me for. So I wanted to include that as well as like the final thing of my personal experiences. I'm going to go ahead and finish reading from this wiki. Anyone who gets a close look at the Mothman seems to suffer from extreme fear and psychological distress, sometimes lasting for months or years afterwards. In particular, people say that a sense of pure evil overcomes them when they see Mothman's eyes. He can fold his wings and walk with a weird shuffle that many witnesses compare to a penguin. When he flies, he unfolds his wings and shoots straight up with great speed, then levels out to go wherever he wants to go. He is rarely observed flapping his wings, except for on takeoff. Witnesses often describe his flight pattern as straight up, like a helicopter. He can fly much faster than any bird should be able to fly, as measured by those victims who suffered from what seems to be Mothman's favorite activity, chasing cars. He'll fly in front of them and even sometimes hit at the roof. And, that parallels to the entity that, once again, we saw in the cemetery, me and my friends. He flew up from behind that tree, straight up into the sky, and then he started chasing after us. But we did hear his wings flapping. It sounded very leathery. Flapping its wings, like leathery, bat-esque type wings. That's what it sounded like to us, the way it was flapping. Mothman sightings have been associated with at least two other cryptids. Gigantic thunderbirds with gray bodies and red heads that were sighted in the same area at the same time by a few witnesses, and Owlman, which is an identical creature with wings and red eyes sighted in Cornwall, England in 1976. Sheriff George Johnson, who the original witnesses contacted, believed the Mothman may have been a large heron. Wildlife biologist Dr. Robert L. Smith at West Virginia University thought that Mothman was a sandhill crane, which the newspapers then reported on, but the witnesses completely disagreed. Skeptic Joe Nickell posited owls as an explanation because of their eye shine and their silhouette resembling the headless Mothman. Most modern skeptics seem to agree with Joe Nickell, but the sightings might just be too extraordinary to attribute them to such animals. Two legends from Shawnee lore mention creatures closely resembling Mothman, deemed, sorry if I mispronounce this, Misigma and Wapi, respectively. In the legend of Misigma, description of Mothman is indeed similar to Bigfoot by ceremonial dress used during the bread dance. The Wapi legend is also similar in that it's part of Shawnee lore, and that a family of Native Americans chose to become white hawks living in the forest near Point Pleasant. So that's interesting with the shape-shifting aspect, with the story I told you of those three witches that could shapeshift. Some believe the Mothman may be an angel, demon, or the product of a blood curse placed upon the town by Chief Cornstalk, who was murdered along with his son in the area. Similarly, the curse theory is one very attached to the collapse of the Silver Bridge. So yeah, that's basically going to be all for this video. I just wanted to talk about the Mothman or the Owlman and, give some little stories, personal experiences, personal encounters, I believe, that could have been with this entity. But yeah, that's going to be all for this video. Let me know what you think the Mothman is, the Owlman. Let me know if you have any experiences or encounters with him. Leave it down below in the comment section. I would love to hear your experiences or your theories on what he is. Do you think he's a fallen angel or a demon that's causing these events to happen? Do you think he's more of just like a positive angel of death type situation where he's not necessarily causing the events, but he's around because he just knows that something's coming and people just happen to see him? He appears almost as a warning in that aspect. Not that he's warning intentionally, but just because he's around, people know that something's going to happen. Or do you think that he is intentionally coming to warn people that something's going to happen so that it might possibly be averted? Let me know your opinions, your theories, your thoughts, and your encounters if you have any. I would love to read that. But that's going to be all for this video. As always, until next time, hail to the witches, and blessed be.